Did you know that Max Verstappen led for much of the 2025 Monaco GP, but finished off the podium? An experimental FIA rule and a seemingly brilliant strategy ended up working against him. Do you think these rules ruin the spectacle or make it more interesting? Let me know in the comments. Is Red Bull losing control of the season, or was it just a one-off stumble? In this video, we're going to analyze what exactly happened to Verstappen in Monaco, why he finished fourth after leading for much of the race, and how this affects Red Bull's future in the 2025 season. The 2025 Monaco Grand Prix was not just another race. Although at first glance the event maintained its glamour and unique atmosphere on the Formula One calendar, what happened on the track unleashed a wave of criticism, frustration among drivers, and serious questioning of the direction the category is taking in its attempt to modernize the spectacle. One of the main focuses of this controversy was precisely Max Verstappen, who despite leading much of the race, finished in a disappointing fourth place. But what is truly significant is not just the final result, but how it got to that point and what this reveals about the current state of F1, Red Bull, and Verstappen himself. To understand the context of this result, it is essential to analyze the regulation change imposed by the FIA exclusively for this edition of the Monaco GP. The rule required all drivers to make at least 2 pit stops, using 3 different tire compounds throughout the race. This measure sought to energize a race that, historically, has been known for its lack of overtaking and for excessively rewarding those who qualify well. The intention behind this change was not trivial: to break years of monotony on a track where one-stop strategies had become predictable and, in many cases, unchangeable. However, the execution of this idea had the complete opposite effect to what was intended. Far from generating positive chaos or spectacular overtaking, the rule ended up blurring the true competitive possibilities on the track. Despite the multiple stops, the finishing order was practically the same as the starting grid. The driver who started on pole, Lando Norris, won without any major threat, while Verstappen, who had qualified fourth, remained stuck in that same position as he crossed the finish line. Over 78 laps, the strategic changes offered no real incentive to take risks, simply because overtaking in Monaco remains almost impossible, regardless of a strategy or the driver's talent. Verstappen, known for his frankness and straightforward approach to pointing out what he doesn't like, was quick to express his discontent in a sarcastic yet devastating way. "Why not make 10 stops? I could have made 4 today and I'd still be in P4, he said after getting out of the car, clearly criticizing the regulations. His words, although ironic, reflect a sentiment shared by many within the paddock, that these types of experiments not only fail to solve the structural problems of circuits like Monaco, but also add a layer of unnecessary confusion to race strategy. Red Bull team principal Christian Horner was not far behind and was blunt. "I didn't see a single overtake." That phrase surgically sums up the failure of the new format to meet its core objective: to provide a real spectacle on the track. From a technical perspective, Verstappen's frustration is more than understandable. On a circuit where every millimeter counts, and where a driver's confidence in their car can mean the difference between a perfect lap and a costly mistake, the RB21 failed to live up to expectations. And while Red Bull had demonstrated unquestionable technical solidity in previous races, the car's weaknesses were laid bare in Monaco. The lack of downforce in slow corners, poor traction in sections like the Rascasse, and a general inability to adapt to such a unique layout set the tone for a weekend in which Verstappen had to push himself to the limit without being able to make the difference he usually does. And while the FIA defended the measure, arguing that it was necessary to test different solutions for extreme scenarios like Monaco, the general perception is that this rule not only failed to improve competition, but also further highlighted the circuit's inherent problems. Toto Wolff and Christian Horner agreed, somewhat unusually, that if Monaco is to remain on the calendar, it's necessary to go beyond artificial strategies. Wolff proposed introducing specific rules, such as limiting deceleration to avoid so-called car trains, while Horner was even more direct, proposing structural changes to the layout. But here a bigger dilemma arises. To what extent is it possible to modify a circuit that is part of the historical DNA of Formula One without betraying its essence? This scenario places Verstappen in a unique situation. On the one hand, he remains competitive, determined, and at the forefront of the championship fight. On the other, he's forced to deal with arbitrary rules and a car that, at least on these types of tracks, doesn't perform as it should. The tension between talent and external limitations becomes increasingly evident, and this creates an irresistible narrative for the public. Can a driver, even one of Max's caliber, overcome a system that sometimes seems to work against him? As the 2025 season progresses, rumors pointing to a possible split between Max Verstappen and Red Bull have intensified. Although both parties officially maintain a united stance, what is happening on the track, and even more so off it, suggests that the relationship may not be going through its best period. The frustration the driver expressed after the Monaco Grand Prix is not an isolated incident. It adds to a series of attitudes, statements, and strategic silences that are fueling rumors about his immediate future. In a sport where chess moves occur both in the offices and on the track, every unspoken word, every gesture of discomfort, and every technical decision has the potential to become a media earthquake. Within the paddock, rumors are part of the usual landscape, but when the same doubts are consistently repeated in prestigious media outlets, and especially when they come from sources close to a driver's environment, that's when they begin to take on a more solid form. Some specialist journalists have suggested that Verstappen could be exploring alternatives beyond Red Bull, especially if the team fails to meet the demands of a season that has begun with fierce competition from McLaren and Ferrari. And although Max has a current contract with Red Bull, what many emphasize is that in Formula One, contracts exist until they no longer suit one of the parties. The most persistent rumors indicate that Ferrari would be interested in securing his services. After several years of rebuilding and unfulfilled promises, the Italian team is looking for a dominant figure to return them to the top of the table. In that sense, a driver like Verstappen, with multiple world titles and a reputation as a relentless driver, would represent exactly the profile they need. There is even talk of a multi-million-dollar offer that would include a central role in the development of the car and a strategic autonomy that few drivers have had at Maranello since the days of Schumacher. This, of course, is not just a question of money, but of power, control, and long-term ambition. Max himself, although he has avoided making sweeping statements, has done little to quell this speculation. His words after the Monaco GP, laced with disappointment, could be interpreted as a warning sign for Red Bull. It's not just a poor result on a difficult circuit, but a deeper sense that the project is no longer moving forward with the same clarity as in previous years. In Formula One, champions don't just seek to win, they seek to do so in a dominant, innovative way, and with a structure that reflects their vision for the sport. And when that vision begins to clash with the team's management, the cracks become evident. In this context, rumors of internal tensions within the Red Bull team itself have also begun to emerge. While Christian Horner has been one of the key drivers of Verstappen's career for years, some recent decisions related to technical updates, race strategies, and team management have caused friction between the two parties. Although nothing has been officially announced, it is known that internal meetings have raised disagreements regarding the approach the team should take to counter the rise of McLaren and Ferrari. Verstappen, always demanding, and with a very clear vision of how he wants to compete, could be feeling increasingly limited by collective decisions that don't align with his style. It's important to understand that in today's Formula One, the power of the driver has grown significantly. They are no longer simply executors of other people's strategies. Great champions are actively involved in car development, in planning the update schedule, and even in decisions about the technical staff that accompanies them. And Max is no exception. If you feel like your voice isn't being heard or that your suggestions aren't being translated into concrete action, the level of commitment to the project can begin to erode, no matter how solid it may appear from the outside. Amid this sea of speculation, possible departures within Red Bull's technical team are also being mentioned, especially if the team fails to reverse the downward trend seen at circuits like Monaco. Some inside sources have suggested that certain key engineers could be targeted by other teams, adding an additional layer of instability. And if recent F1 history has shown anything, it's that a winning team can lose its advantage in a matter of months if it fails to retain its human talent. Max knows this, and that's why his sights are set beyond the next Grand Prix. They're focused on the overall project, the long term, and the conviction that he's in the right place to continue building his legacy. With this outlook in mind, and with the rumor mill increasing in volume with each race, it's crucial to closely monitor not only what happens on the track, but also the gestures, statements, and strategic decisions off it. Because while Red Bull still has room to turn the situation around, the margin for error is narrowing. Verstappen isn't just a driver who wants to win, he's a competitor who always demands to be in a position to dominate. And if he realizes that's no longer possible with his current team, a new chapter in his career could begin. Red Bull is undoubtedly at a crossroads. After dominating dominantly in previous seasons, the start of 2025 has shown that this hegemony is no longer untouchable. Although they remain competitive and capable of winning races, their technical advantage has clearly narrowed, causing both rivals and team members to begin to act with a degree of caution that wasn't previously necessary. The team's internal management, strategic decisions during races, and the development of the RB21 are now under scrutiny because keeping Max Verstappen happy is not just a contractual issue, but a priority to remain a dominant force in Formula One. The RB21's performance in Monaco was the clearest expression of a trend that, although subtle, had been emerging since the first races of the calendar. On circuits where downforce in slow corners is essential, such as the Principality Street circuit, the car showed significant shortcomings. The car suffered particularly in technical sections, such as Casino Square and the Rascasse, where understeer was noticeable and sapped Verstappen's confidence lap after lap. This situation not only limited his qualifying performance, but also affected his options in the race, forcing him to constantly adapt to a car that simply didn't respond to his aggressive and precise style. The team's technical department introduced certain updates, such as modifications to the front brake ducts designed to improve airflow and optimize aerodynamic balance, but the impact of these improvements was minimal. Red Bull knew that Monaco wasn't the ideal circuit for testing revolutionary solutions, but they nevertheless opted to make adjustments that would at least minimize damage. It wasn't enough. The lack of traction and the car's inability to generate adequate tire temperatures during critical phases of the race made it clear that the RB21 isn't as versatile as its predecessors. And that, for a team like Red Bull, which has based its recent success on its ability to adapt to all types of track, is a warning sign. At this point, the figure of Max Verstappen becomes even more central. His talent, experience, and ability to squeeze every last tenth of a second out of the car remain an unparalleled asset for Red Bull. However, even the best driver needs a machine that matches his ambitions. The Dutchman has proven once again that he can stay in the fight even when conditions aren't optimal, but his body language in Monaco, his sarcastic remarks, and his evident emotional disconnect throughout the weekend speak of a driver who is beginning to lose patience. And that, for someone so competitive and direct, could be the prelude to deeper decisions if action isn't taken soon. Red Bull's management, led by Christian Horner, has attempted to project calm and unity. In his post-race statements, he insisted that this was an atypical situation and that the team is already working on concrete solutions for the upcoming races. However, that narrative is no longer enough to calm the situation. What's at stake is not just the result of a Grand Prix, but the perception that Red Bull is losing some of the control it had worked so hard to build. And when competing at the highest level, perception is as important as reality. If rivals sense weakness, the pressure increases, and if the star driver begins to hesitate, the entire structure can plunge into crisis. Internally, the decisions made in the coming weeks will be crucial. The development of the RB21 must be urgently adjusted so that the car regains competitiveness in all sections of the calendar, not just those that have historically favored it. Furthermore, Verstappen's emotional and professional management will be a delicate challenge. Keeping him engaged, convinced of the project, and confident that the team can deliver a dominant car again is a task as crucial as that of the engineers in the wind tunnel. And here, not only Red Bull's technical ability comes into play, but also its institutional maturity in dealing with moments of tension. At the same time, it's fair to acknowledge that the team still retains very clear strengths. The structure remains solid, the technical staff boasts some of the most respected talents in the paddock, and there is still significant room to make up ground over the remainder of the season. The championship is far from over, and while McLaren and Ferrari have proven strong, Red Bull has the tools to fight back. The question, then, is no longer whether they can do so, but whether they can do so in time before their star driver's frustration turns into an irreversible rift. Talking about a decline in Red Bull's performance isn't simply pointing out that they're no longer winning as often. It's recognizing that, in a championship as close as the 2025 season, a minimal loss of technical or tactical advantage can unleash a domino effect with unpredictable consequences. The case of Max Verstappen is the clearest example. A driver accustomed to being at the top, now forced to fight with a less competitive car, can make decisions that completely alter the current structure of the sport. And if that decision were to result in a change of team, the entire map of Formula One would be reconfigured. The first direct consequence would be for Red Bull. Losing Verstappen would not only mean losing their star driver, but also the pillar on which they have built their dominance in recent years. He has not only been the leader on the track, but also a key voice in the technical development of the car and the overall cohesion of the team. His departure would entail a profound reorganization of the development strategy, as well as an urgent search for a replacement who, honestly, is hardly up to his standard. Even if they opted to promote a young driver or sign someone with experience, the required chemistry and adaptability would take time, and that's a luxury Red Bull can't afford if it wants to continue fighting for championships. On a sporting level, Verstappen's departure would upset the current balance between teams. If, for example, he decided to join Ferrari, we would be talking about a paradigm shift. The Italian team, which has shown consistent progress, would automatically become the team to beat. With Max at the wheel and a competitive car like the one they've developed this year, the combination could be lethal for the competition. Ferrari would recover not only an elite driver, but also a winning mentality it has desperately sought for more than a decade. This kind of signing not only has an impact on the track, but also emotionally and symbolically, it would mark the beginning of a new era. There would also be repercussions for the rest of the grid. Teams like McLaren and Mercedes would be forced to review their own medium and long-term strategies. Verstappen's arrival at another team would raise the level of technical and strategic demands on all fronts. Investments in aerodynamic development, engines, and simulation would accelerate. Sponsors would also react. A move of this magnitude generates a chain reaction in terms of marketing, media exposure, and international reach. And in an environment where millions move at the pace of the decisions of a few, such a change can completely alter the commercial balance of the championship. No less important is the internal repercussions within the FIA and the regulatory environment. The fact that a driver of Verstappen's caliber is forced to change teams due to a perception of stagnation or a lack of response to controversial regulatory decisions, as happened in Monaco, could also exert institutional pressure. The sport's governing body would be forced to review the effectiveness and real impact of its reforms. It wouldn't be unreasonable to imagine a scenario in which certain regulatory adjustments are accelerated to prevent situations like this from recurring, especially if they have such significant consequences for the championship structure. From Verstappen's own perspective, the change would also entail risks. While it's undeniable that his talent could adapt to any car, joining a new structure always entails a transition period. New engineers, a new way of working, different team dynamics, and a new culture to assimilate. However, Max has already proven himself a driver capable of taking on great challenges, and he doesn't seem the type of athlete to shy away from difficult decisions. If he believes the ceiling with Red Bull has been reached, and that he can find the necessary conditions elsewhere to continue building his legacy, he won't hesitate to take that step, even if it means going through a period of adaptation. At the same time, the fans would also play an important role in this scenario. Verstappen has a massive fan base, especially in Europe. His move to another team could drag a portion of the public with him, redefining long-standing loyalties. Teams like Ferrari or Mercedes, traditionally associated with other figures, could see their fan base and public narrative reshaped. In this sport, a team's identity is often shaped by its drivers, and in that sense, Max is a figure capable of immediately changing that identity. All of this shows that the consequences of a change in performance, especially when it comes to a team like Red Bull and a driver like Verstappen, go far beyond individual race results. What's at stake is the stability of a project, control of the championship narrative, and ultimately, the competitive future of Formula One. Therefore, every race that passes without a decisive response from Red Bull increases the pressure. The clock is ticking, and the margin for error shrinks. In this context, the next stage of the championship will not only be decisive in defining positions, but also in clarifying whether this team can still be the epicenter of dominance in the category or if it is beginning to lose its place. The coming months will mark a turning point for Red Bull, and especially for Max Verstappen. What's at stake is no longer just the championship lead, but the future direction of one of the most successful duos of the last decade. The dynamic that has been established since the Monaco Grand Prix demands immediate, decisive, and sustained responses. And it's not just about results on paper. The real challenge will be to demonstrate that there is still a shared vision between driver and team, a clear strategy that keeps them united and competitive against the relentless advance of McLaren and Ferrari. Red Bull enters this stage of the calendar with the obligation to show firm signs of recovery. On the technical side, the team has outlined a roadmap that includes specific aerodynamic updates designed to improve performance on medium to high-load circuits. These improvements are not just minor tweaks. There is talk of a complete overhaul of the diffuser configuration and a partial redesign of the wing profiles to adapt to the new rules imposed by the FIA. Implementation will be key. If these updates don't have an immediate and visible impact, the team will not only be outclassed on the track, but will also lose the trust of its star driver, who has not hesitated to publicly express his disappointment. And it is precisely this emotional factor that cannot be overlooked. Verstappen, accustomed to playing a central role in the Red Bull project, needs to regain that sense of control. He needs to feel that his feedback is being taken into account, that his specific needs as a driver are being addressed, and that the team hasn't lost the hunger that brought them to the top. If the next Grand Prix don't restore that conviction, the relationship could cool irreversibly. And once that happens, the exit rumors cease to be mere speculation and become silent negotiations. In parallel, there is a hidden struggle taking place away from the cameras, but one that will have enormous weight in what is to come: the regulatory battle. Red Bull has lobbied hard for the FIA to review the use of flexible parts, and the implementation of these restrictions at the Spanish Grand Prix will be a test of the day. If these measures manage to limit the advantage that teams like McLaren have gained so far, Red Bull could recover some of the lost ground. But if there isn't a substantial change in performance, frustration will grow. Not only because of the competition on the track, but also because this political battle will have borne no fruit. On the other hand, we cannot ignore the growing pressure Red Bull is receiving from its commercial partners and sponsors. The team has grown accustomed to leading the way, generating headlines, and capitalizing on victories in the form of multi-million-dollar contracts. But with the narrative now dominated by McLaren's resurgence and Ferrari's consistency, Red Bull's media exposure has diminished. This situation is pushing management to make more aggressive moves, both in the sporting and institutional arenas. If they don't react, they could lose not only on-track performance but also positioning off it, something unacceptable for a structure built precisely on its ability to make an impact. Verstappen's immediate surroundings are also preparing for all scenarios. Sources close to the driver assure that medium-term options are already being analyzed, and while there is no declared intention to break away from Red Bull, the openness to listening to alternatives is real. Ferrari remains the strongest name in these conversations, but not the only one. Other teams' interest in a figure like Max is constant, and every point lost by Red Bull fuels the perception that his departure is not a fantasy, but an increasingly plausible possibility. In that sense, what lies ahead will not just be a test of engineering or race strategy. It will be a validation of leadership. Red Bull must demonstrate that it can reinvent itself under pressure, that it doesn't rely solely on its driver's talent to stay in the fight, and that it can respond to a highly competitive environment with vision, speed, and effectiveness. If he succeeds, he'll not only retain Verstappen, but will send a clear message to the entire grid that he remains the rival to beat. If he doesn't, the cycle could begin to close. And it's at this very moment that every decision matters. From the upcoming qualifying sessions to the smallest race strategies, from internal factory management to behind-the-scenes dealings with the FIA, everything will be under scrutiny. The margin for error has been reduced to a minimum. Any misstep can trigger consequences that Red Bull is in no position to accept.